I would like to start by thanking Sister Jayanti, because I'm going to share with you a couple of experiences of the process toward building the eventual Paris Agreement. But I would like you to know that almost in every moment of falling into total desperation, there would be this little knock on the door, and it would be the sister. And she would say, "Hello, Christiana, I'm here to meditate with you." And I thought, what angel walks into my office at the moments in which I totally need some peace and love? So thank you for bringing peace and love. I want to start the story when I was given the responsibility to pick up a disastrous United Nations process. So any of you who follow climate change may remember that in 2009, we had a high expectation conference in Copenhagen, known by many of us as Hopenhagen, because there was so much hope. And it ended up in a total disaster. I don't know if there are any survivors of Copenhagen here, but there were quite a few thousand. And 6 months later, I was given the responsibility of picking up this process where it was in the garbage can. And Secretary General of the United Nations said, "Could you please pick up that process and see what you can do with it?" I said, "Okay, that's an interesting terms of reference for a job. I'll see what I can do." And what was really fascinating to me is that although I had been in that process for 20 years or 25 years before that, it had never really hit me what a deep hole of desperation and anger and distrust and, frankly, hate the world had fallen into about climate change, because the prevailing sentiment was, it is totally unfair, it is very unjust, it is what is destroying our society, and we don't have anything to do about it. There's nothing that we can do, because it's too complex, it's too many differing opinions about it, too many interests, too expensive, and the most optimistic people said it's too late anyway, so don't even try. I thought, okay, well, that's an interesting sentiment in which to work. The good news about that is that since everybody that was working on that didn't want to talk to each other because they were, totally furious with each other, I thought, okay, good, there is an absence of doing here, so let's start to be, which is where we should start anyway. Right? Before we jump into the doing of whatever we are doing, let's just take a few minutes and see what we are being. Who are we? What is it? How are we stepping up to the world? How are we stepping up to the challenge? And what are we bringing to it? And my quick analysis of that was, we're actually in the space here of impossibility. And I thought that is what needs to be changed. So shorthand that I use now for that process is stubborn optimism, in the sense of I really understood that we had to change the global sentiment. And the prevailing feeling, the prevailing mindset, the prevailing thought force had to be, we are going to do this. We have no idea how. But we have to be optimistic in the sense, not of celebrating something that we had done, because we hadn't done anything. So optimism for me is not a celebration. It is a choice. It is a choice of mindset. It is an input to a challenge. It's not the result. And furthermore, when you have so many challenges in front of you, you have to be, frankly, very stubborn about being optimistic, because everybody will tell you that it's impossible. And you will come up against many different barriers. So you have to be stubborn about being optimistic. And that change in mindset began to pervade everyone who was working on this, to the point where we moved from a global really bad mood on climate to say, well, we used to think it was impossible, now we think it's maybe possible, and then we went from possible to probable, and then we went from probable to likely, and then from likely to unstoppable. But it was the mindset, the approach. Who are we? Who are we as human beings? And do we want to look at ourselves in the mirror and accept that while knowing everything that we knew, that we had not done everything that we should? And that change in attitude is one of the very transformational forces that allowed the Paris Agreement to occur. Of course, there were many other things that other people would see, technology, politics, et cetera, but underneath all of that, a different way of being in the world. 3 years into this process, when we already had a line of sight that maybe this is beginning to be probable and likely, we hit a very, very difficult barrier. And I was sitting there going, what on earth is going on? Yes, I understood the politics and the legal consequences, but I knew there was something underneath that was much, much deeper. And at the same time, because the universe is so wise, at the same time, my marriage came to a screeching halt, 25 years of marriage, and I perceived myself as a totally helpless and hopeless victim of what had occurred. And for a year, I got up in the morning and I put on my optimistic smile and I went to work and I infused optimism into everybody, and then I went home and I cried myself to sleep every single night. And after about a year of this, and me not being able to get out of my victim role, and the negotiations not being able to move forward, I thought, this is not good. This is not good. I'm getting to the point of suicidal thoughts about my own personal life, and the system is running out of time. We have to move beyond this. And it hit me. We were faced with the victim-perpetrator dynamic, both in my personal life as well as in the international negotiations. Because the countries of the South were accusing the countries of the North of having caused everything, and the countries of the South are victims, and the countries of the North were saying, whoa. Maybe we caused it in the past, but you are the perpetrators of the future. And so that victim-perpetrator dynamic was the same one that I was having, and that I had not breathed to anyone, not a whisper to anyone, and nobody knew, but I could see that the victim-perpetrator dynamic that I had put myself into and that I had agreed to immobilize myself with was this same dynamic that was immobilizing the international negotiations. At which point I said, that's it. I cannot continue to put myself in that hole, because the consequences are much graver than just me. The consequences are at the global level. And it wasn't easy, and I'm frankly still there, still trying to crawl myself out of that. But once I had realized the relationship between the individual and the global impact, and once I had realized that the reality that I hold inside of me and that you all hold inside of yourselves individually, collectively has a consequence, and that we communicate that internal reality in ways that are somewhat inexplicable, but also very understandable, then you really begin to understand the individual responsibility that we all stand in front of if we want to bring harmony at the global level. Because that means looking inside of us and moving ourselves into that space before we can expect anything else to change. And the story continues, and we did get a Paris Agreement. And it is an incredibly It's a multifaceted story because I realize it doesn't have an abrupt end, either for the international conversation or for me personally. But it has elucidated a very clear path, and it has brought many people to stand in front of our own experience and assume that, and I loved what the previous panel said, that responsibility, because it is not just a responsibility, it is our ability to respond to the challenge that we are facing at that time.